And then other people actually need to go towards that somewhat to get an idea of what that is about and why that hook keeps coming around. It's not really a why. It's more like, what is that? And then instead of going into a cause and effect situation, you actually understand that what you're doing there is a habit pattern that doesn't need to happen, that it gets triggered by something, and what it triggers is the examined area of your mind that is loaded up. It's called, conventionally, it's called repression. In Buddhism we call it ignorance. And it's, if you take it further into other examples of the Yogacara tradition breaks that down into 8 consciousnesses, and that particular consciousness is protected by the 7th, and it is the 8th, or the habit energy. And it's so it shuffles down through there and tries to fulfill that. So you trigger it, and then it comes forward. So it's about being aware of it. If you're really aware of a tiger, you see it's a tiger, you're not going to think that looks like a teddy bear. You know, I'm being silly about it, but I'm just saying, if you really see that it's a dangerous thing, you won't go there. But what we do is we cover them up with all kinds of ideas and opinions. This is why people continue to, say, smoke or have, because they don't really see clearly what it is. That's like we have in our tradition, we have the 4 reminders. The first contemplates the preciousness of being free and well favored. People don't totally ignore that. It's totally amazing that we are even here. So, but here we are, and if you really realize this, then you probably are going to try to work with your situation as it is, rather than try to jump away from it into some ideal situation. More? Yes. Sean?
You said some people may need to just observe as they go into it, and some people may need to stop and just go into it. How does one tell what's the wiser path?
Good question. And my understanding, and I'm not saying I certainly don't know everything, but the way it looks from not only working with my own craziness, but with others down through the last 40 years or so, it looks like that you need to strengthen or stretch just the awareness, just a bare attention situation. Just you sit down, you hold still, and we do a tremendous amount of it here. And the reason it's scheduled and the reason I insist on it for those people who live in this situation is because I know how easy it is to just look away, cover it up. Passion, aggression, and ignorance, the 3 poisons, actually stop us from seeing our incredible Buddha nature. If you see Buddha nature, then you don't even have to choose to help others. You can't help it. Everywhere you look, you see yourself. Everywhere you look, you see your everyone has been your mother. Everyone has been your father. Everyone is your child. Is a way of using a metaphor that is, even people who are horrible, terrible people are twisted up in their suffering so much that their activity tends to, that's the only way you get rid of their negativity is by to give it to others in the form of war, anger, taking whole nations into war. So if you're in this room, probably a pretty good chance you're going to be able to see this at some point in your lifetime, because your intention is to see what is true. You're not here to believe in something. I don't have anything to sell, but I do have a message that if you want to see what this is, sit down, hold still, and look at, insist on seeing the truth. Don't believe anything I say. Don't ignore anything I say, but don't buy it. I'm not here to sell. It would be your understanding that would show up. So sit a lot. More than that. What you just thought. It's supposed to be funny, Sean.
Smiling.
Oh, that's right. I can't see because of the fur. That's better. Am I back on here?
Yeah.
This is what Sean did. So, Andrew.
Can we repress short experiences?
I'm not saying, anything's possible. possible. But I'm saying when you're doing that sense awareness practice, when you're sitting and you're watching, your mind is starting to go off into a bad neighborhood. And one of the things I say, if you start to have negativity or some kind of negative, instead of shutting that out or trying to stop that or adding some kind of criticism to it, like I shouldn't be doing that, what am I doing this for, why am I feeling this way? Instead, just include everything that's in the present moment already. The sense of touch is always here. It's never 3 weeks away. The sense of smell is extremely immediate. It's right here, and it's totally sane, and it's yours. You're here, and so far as there is a you, so you're sitting like so. Maybe you're sitting for a few hours or something, and some kind of negativity arises. Just don't get rid of the negativity. Continue to watch that, but then also you could, as an approach or as a practice, you could flash on the sense of touch, the sense of seeing, just a sense of color. Before you know what color it is, just how it feels to look at that color, red. Before you know it's red. And before you know that it's red, move to the sense of hearing. And just hear, in my case, tinnitus. Maybe in your case, it's squirrels running down the side of the fence. Or? Yes. Somebody else? David, you have a question?
What is it about the bad neighborhood that's so inviting sometimes?
Well, I think it's just a combination of things. It could be the actual drug itself, which is our physiology is there, but then also not liking ourselves, not liking being having some kind of causes and conditions that are trapped in there in some way. That just like sometimes you have a 2-year-old child who has a terrible temper, then you have another 2-year-old child who is just a little angel. So, this is coming from somewhere else. I don't promote past life, belief in past lives. I don't believe in much at all. But something's happening along that line. Along the line of, we've been here for a long time. Maybe not as this body form. We've been here. So who knows what that for sure. Science is not particularly looking at things. It wants to look at things that it can figure out. It doesn't want to look at things that it can't figure out because it's too much failure. But we can look at this through your clarity, your understanding, through your awareness, which doesn't particularly think. That happens to be located right about here. It's not this paranoia and it's not this fear. It's just this. Completely open, no past, no future. It's always here. Doesn't mean the clock doesn't tick. Put a battery in it. Well,
in the bad neighborhood, if we find ourselves there, we talk about going to the senses in that situation. What does that do to the neighborhood?
Well, I don't know if I can spell it out and define it that clearly, but it allows the awareness to be more important than the thoughts about what the neighborhood. So if you see what it is clearly, then you don't have to choose to go somewhere else. That's why I take exception to people who say you just have to make the right choices. This is just bullshit. I get tired of hearing that. Does it show? That's why there isn't some kind of choice going on, but to emphasize that as a solution, that's the misunderstanding. Sure, you might need to do some of that, but you need to really not emphasize the thinking part of the mind that is tied directly into your narcissistic self-centeredness that believes there's somebody who needs advancement, and there's somebody who needs to be protected, there's somebody. And so there isn't anyone. You don't need to have an identity, a self. You do much better without grasping at somebody and grasping at somebody else. This polarity is very, very distressing. I think I swore with a child in the room. That's not good. You're not give me a pass, maybe. I don't know if her mother will, but so I'll apologize for that. So, It seems to be necessary to be clear about that so that if you see it clearly, then it's choiceless. You don't need to, the choices are like evaluating this and that, right and wrong, this and this and this. If you just have the courage and the patience to just look right in the face of whatever's showing up in terms of phenomena, just look at it, you will see it's possible for you to see you're really not separate from anything that's occurring. And if you do that, then it's like knowing how to digest food. You just know how to do that. You don't have to think about how do I control my body temperature? You don't want to be if you were put in charge of all that, as I've said before, you'd be dead in a couple of minutes. You don't need that kind of thing. This is happening. Consciousness awareness is like I can move my awareness. I can look at this computer screen, but I can move my awareness to the back of my head. Anyone can do that. It's kind of amazing. You can actually move your awareness anywhere. You can move your awareness to Utah. I mean, who'd want to do that, of course? But you can actually move it anywhere. It's just an astonishing thing, especially if you're not looking for proof. Go ahead.
Would we have to have some sort of recollection or awareness to Utah?
So, you're just aware now where that's at, because that's not Europe. It's not specific at all. You can't really nail what that is. There is no Utah. We don't even know what that is. Somebody came along and drew lines on a piece of paper and made mountains. There isn't any Utah. Say, Tom? Give me an example.
Yeah, what comes up for me is my desire to control, to plan, to, know what's going to happen next. And,
Go a little bit. You don't have to get rid of anything. You don't have to change who you are and be an airhead who doesn't. But the thing about plans is they don't work. You make a plan and you got to change something, or you make a plan and part of the plan caves in or falls through. And so it's just a matter of working with that, where it's at, being aware of it. You can tell if you're working with it in an appropriate way if you have a plan to carry the garbage out to the trash bin or wherever you're going. That's your plan. And if you go out and if you get on the front porch and the bottom of the bag falls out all over the porch, watch your emotions when that happens. If you get upset about it, then you're stuck with your plans. And this is the self-centeredness that wants to have its way. But if that's just included, I'm not saying you don't think, oh my, or gee whiz, isn't it? That won't happen, but it'll be very strong. And there'll be a lot of work in that. Even though you've got work now, you got to clean this all up. But that's still part of it. It's part of your life. I say often, don't miss your life. Don't miss the humor in your life. Don't miss that kind of, you could call it a failure, just causes and conditions come along and somebody made a crappy plastic bag. You chose that bag. So a little bit of levity in there. It's not like, you're totally thrilled that the bag broke. I'm not going the other direction. I'm saying there's some kind of an openness happening with you as you live your life where you make the plan, but you're not locked down on it. You're going to do this. You're going to take the garbage out. You're going to make a plan, but then this caves in. The example I used not too long ago was we have a karma house next door. We planned to put a store in there. We plan. But if the whole thing just came apart, it's not tragic. We all might be sad about it, but we'll do something else. But if the metaphor I often use, if you're looking at your awareness, then your thought patterns are bringing up the rear. Then your thought patterns are there if you need them, and they're totally appropriate in some situation, like how to think about how to clean up the garbage all over the porch, where the bag that just broke. To think about, well, I can do this. I'll go get a snow shovel. That'll be easier to it's just you're thinking about it, and so you're using it. But the awareness is primary. Awareness at the same time is not separate from the pine trees in your yard. The awareness is not separate from the snow that's almost melted. The awareness is not separate from how your back feels. Awareness is not separate from anything.
Should you look for neighborhoods?
Yes. Yeah, you look for an environment that supports your sanity. Not your politics, your opinions, your ideas, although there might be some of that in there, but your basic sanity. What is going to fundamentally help? I feel this is a place that's totally dedicated to, creates a space and a timing and a set of forms so someone can come walk in here and sit down and train their mind to sit down, hold still. There's people that can teach them, not just me, but other people who can teach people how to meditate. Sit down, hold still, see who you are, find out who you are. And when the negativity starts arising, make friends with that. How do you do that? Don't go against it. Don't validate it. Don't blame anybody. Don't shut down on it. Don't leave the Zendo. Sit here and just look at the texture of that emotion and that feeling without the lamination of ideas, opinions, hope, and fear, blame. So this is a good neighborhood, but the actual good neighborhood is your own consciousness. Your consciousness is completely, you're not separate from the Buddha. You could say, well, what the hell does that mean? Who is he anyway? What's he got to do with this? He's been gone for a couple thousand years. But the word Buddha means awakened, and the word Dharma, Buddha Dharma, means awakened truth. So you're actually awake to what the truth is. And what was the truth that he taught? Everything is dependently, everything is dependently arisen, not separate. There's separated things. Fingers are separate, but you don't want it. It's not so separate. You can take this finger in the other room. Not that separate. It's separated, but beginning to see that this is what's called in our tradition prajna. But also, you could just call it clarity about this and that. You don't have to have a fancy Sanskrit word necessarily. Sean?
Are there traps to be aware of in good neighborhoods?
If somebody's trying to seduce you and make promises, when anybody promises you anything, about 15 red flags should go up. If what somebody is talking to you about is valid, they should be trusting your intelligence to see it, rather than try to convince you. Like if you say, I don't believe this, if someone comes here and lives and say, I just don't want to do this anymore. It's not for mine, not my cup of tea. I don't enter into any kind of discussion unless they want to talk about it. But so the traps would be being sold, as they say, bill of goods. I don't believe it. But when that happens, it's not that some of that, the person telling you that doesn't have good intentions. They might. If somebody's meditated for 2 years and feels like they're doing pretty good, they might, you really should meditate. You really should meditate. No. When it's time, if the message is there, when it's time for you to train your mind in this way, you'll see it. So there's no any kind of promises, or when someone is saying this kind of meditation is better than that kind of meditation. I teach a certain kind of meditation, but I've done several kinds. So somebody just recently had a student who practiced with me for a while go back into another teacher, and they told me about it and went back into Vipassana. It's totally appropriate. I mean, if they had come to me and said, do you think I should do this? I said, well, no, I think you should practice in this way. And then they said, well, I think I do better in that. I said, but they didn't do this with me. They didn't have a discussion. They just told me. So, apparently that person never was a student of mine. I mean, really. It doesn't make them bad. It just means that they really weren't giving me the benefit of the doubt. If they had been, they would come and say, I'm feeling like going back into Vipassana and talking to this other teacher, I just do better. And I would say, well, what do you mean I do better? And I said, well, I feel better. I said, well, that's not the point of meditation, to feel better. The point of meditation is to see the truth. And you only have to have some real difficult things to go through. So, that being said, I might say, well, why don't you do If you want to do a Vipassana here, you can do that here. I have another student that does Vipassana practice. I'm fine with that. I would rather they did Shikantaza. But I don't know everything. I mean, I want to help the person where they're at, not try to move them into some kind of ideal practice. In Vipassanas, you close your eyes and scan your body, and there's different techniques there. They're very valid techniques. I just don't teach them. Yes.
Can scanning our body help us locate a bad neighborhood?
Maybe. Is that what's coming up for you?
Not at the moment.
No. So maybe, I don't, I'm not trying to lock down anything, say maybe, but always try to do it with your awareness rather than any kind of belief in something or disbelief. Belief, disbelief, and all of that is just a sidetrack. And it might feel okay for a little while, but eventually you're going to have to probably look at the issue itself. David?
I think at times when I'm just so caught up in something that I couldn't, really see it, but scanning the body just kind of initiated something.
It's just present.
If the goal by neighborhood doesn't arise, is there a way to determine whether we're in a bad neighborhood or not?
Paraphrase your question, please.
What would be some characteristics of a bad neighborhood?
Well, I can give you one right away, real quick. A feeling that's like, I got this. You ever had that? I got this. You ever heard someone say that and think, no, you don't? You can see that they're actually going or gripping at something rather than looking any further. Not knowing what the hell's going on is probably an indication you're not being hoodwinked into some bad neighborhood. Anytime there's some kind of temporary security going on, it should be looked at. It's very difficult to just stop grasping. What you have to do is you have to actually look at the grasping to see the way in which the grasping looks. Because you eventually get very, very acquainted with what it feels like to tie down on something. And you also, in retrospect, you see that there's actually someone doing that. And that someone that's doing that is not real. More.
What does not real feel like?
Can't find anybody. The way I talk about it sometimes is a discontinuous identity. you're the person who's sleepy. Now you're the person who's upset. Now you're the person who feels pretty good. Now it just goes on and on to some kind of a ongoing person with all kinds of facets and so on. So it's discontinuous. And to see that the totality of that is to live in the world. The past and the future part of it don't work anymore. It's always now. That's one of the ancient metaphors for this that I've always liked is sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. So it's just the relative situation is always Buddha. Broken garbage bag Buddha.
How is knowing that we need to not go into a bad neighborhood different from thinking we need to fix our habit of going into a bad neighborhood?
Not doing is won't particularly feel like there's no real credential to it. There's no looking for results necessarily. If it's coming out of awareness, then there's no logistics around that are getting you somewhere else away from the bad neighborhood. So it needs to come out of awareness. And when you're looking for results, or you've got some kind of a schema or plan, that the way in which you're going to repair yourself or fix yourself, it's not that can't show up as helpful or something in some ways. There's cognitive behavioral therapy is tools that are helpful somewhat. But the difficulty we have is the fundamental thing that most psychology, philosophy, psychiatry, and everything does not look at is there is not a solid self. And so in order to understand that, one has to enter the spiritual path, which is the path that transcends our physicality without leaving it. Go ahead.
Can the spiritual path be a bad neighborhood?
If it's a true spiritual path, no. But if it's something that calls itself a spiritual path and brags about how good it is and how this is the only way you can do it, and there are teachers and teachings and so on that set that up and charge a lot of money sometimes. But I'm not saying they shouldn't be there. I mean, they're there. It's just there. It's just the way the mind, the different levels of how things work. More about that? Thank you. Good question. Further questions? Go get them.
What defines a spiritual path exactly?
Let me get my dictionary. So what it looks here is I contrast it with a mundane path. The mundane path is, how do I get this? How do I make that? How do I make money? How do I get famous? How do I build a house? How do I, all the various materialistic ideas and goals that we have. So and it's fine. I mean, you can live your whole life just practicing playing the drum or being a musician, and it's a totally valid way to live. I'm not taking away. I'm not saying everybody should be on the spiritual path. It's up to you what you do. But the spiritual path is where you begin to look deeply into what the nature of this is, what mind is, what thoughts are, how they function, how passion, aggression, and ignorance function, how we keep fooling ourselves. And to go into that and look deeply into the nature of what's called reality, without necessarily turning into a philosopher or a scholar or anything else. This isn't to say that some philosophers aren't very spiritual, or that some scholars aren't very spiritual, or that musicians aren't very spiritual. I'm not taking anything away from anybody. I mean, the Grateful Dead was very spiritual. But Mozart probably wasn't, even though he seemed like it. And it's really to impute that he was spiritual, because of the music is so spiritual. But I think he was not so good. And I'm not going to get any bad emails. People don't understand what I just said. Because I love all those people. especially Mozart. So it's a path. So the ground path and fruition. The ground is the spiritual path of suffering or difficulty or stress or what am I going to do? Existential angst, worry, fretting. What's this about? We have that. That's the ground of any kind of and you could just go into psychology and you go into psychotherapy or something. And it's not that wouldn't help, but it doesn't address the fundamental situation, which is mistaken identity. And then it's the causes and conditions that arise around that are so elaborate that you could live the next 18 lifetimes without ever entering a spiritual path. And I'm just saying that, just as something to say. It's the idea of wanting to see fundamentally what this is. And that, Buddhism is a support for that. Buddhism is like a raft across the river of samsara, the river of cause and effect, to see fundamentally the true nature of everything. There is the polarity, some of the most obvious polarity that is not true, but is just extremely, it's believed in by just about everyone, is they think that life and death are two different things. And it's not that there's not a difference there, of course. The body-mind has gone back, the body complex has gone back into the elements, but who you are can't go anywhere. Don't agree with me. Find out. Is that true? Is Sokuzan lying? Find out. Don't take my word for it. Don't believe the thing I say. If I was up here trying to get anybody to believe what I'm saying, I couldn't do this. I'm way too narcissistic and self-centered. I'd be totally ashamed of myself. Do you understand what I just said? If I don't understand it, can you say things you don't understand? It's quite fun. Go ahead, Shoto.
Should we set up standards to stay out of?
A little bit. We and I've talked about that a little bit. And you've asked me something, and since I'm function as your teacher, I said no. So at some point, as Trump Rinpoche once said, you need a teacher so you can lead the teacher. But first, you have to actually have a teacher. You have to actually completely have a teacher, and then at some point, the teacher may still be alive, but you don't need a teacher anymore because you've realized the fundamental nature of what this is. It's not separate. You're not separate from the teacher, not separate from anything. And there's no choices to make. Everything is obvious. If there's two doors, and one is the right door and one is the wrong door, according to the world, you probably won't go through either one. You just look at them. And then if somebody said, in this door there's food, in that door there's garbage cans. Does that help you decide which one to do? It's a question, and it's not rhetorical. I'm asking you that question.
Depends if I'm hungry or if I need to take the trash out.
There's a guy with his feet on the ground. Yes. I was saying a little bit like when I was addressing Sato's question is that I'm going to do this, and I've got a bag, and I've got the garbage, I'm taking it out, and so you're working with the structures and standards all the time. It's just that we don't grasp at them and demand that they work. But, the forms are there, so we work. But forms are empty of what we impute or what we dream up about it. If you start to see that, then you start to see the dependent origination that's happening everywhere, that everything is dependently risen. Although there's a tremendous amount of variation going on, especially in flower arrangements. More.
Can working with an old habit reaffirm an identity of someone that's better working with that?
Again?
So, for instance, use bad neighborhood often with addiction situations.
Yeah.
And working with that in a more positive way, not doing those drugs, reaffirm someone who's not doing those things anymore?
I don't know. What do you think?
The question comes out of, it seems like a lot of, in my personal situation, a lot of things are determined off things I've done, and it kind of reaffirms the past that you say isn't necessarily real, the past or future. They are.
You have to actually know it. If you know it, then the whole shebang, that's a Sanskrit word that means emptiness. The whole shebang just goes to pieces and yet doesn't do anything. It's not two. You can't find two things anywhere because any two things are not separate. It's an amazing situation to find, to just stumble into. And the gratitude is powerful. It's just, so many people are suffering. And you see what this is. How do you tell people about it when they won't listen to you? As they say, makes you think you know everything. It's powerful. I mean, I can't even tune into that. I'd fall apart. What keeps me together? You guys. These guys. Find out who you are. Don't take anybody's word for it, mine or anyone's. Find out who you are deeply. You can do it. Sit down, hold still, watch what moves, and look at the distress. Look at the confusion. The Buddha didn't awaken to a carnival full of unicorns and gift baskets. The Buddha awoke to suffering, intense suffering in the world. And he saw that he was not separate from that. This is his awakening. Further questions? No questions? Goes on.
Trying to make it into a question.
Okay. Make a statement if you have to.
Well, bad neighborhoods, I was just in Detroit, you know. And I found myself on a bad neighborhood in my car because I used to drive really aggressively. And for some reason, I was like an adult adjusted to just zipping out and when someone's telling me someone is crazy and when you feel like you're out of territory and you feel like you're being activated by bad habits, how do you know anything about this?
Practice. It is practice. What quick fix? There's not even a fix. It's not about fixing. It's all about awareness. Even when you've been triggered by something, you're feeling really aggressive. Don't shut down the aggressive. Of course, keep your fists in your pocket. We don't want to say, we're not saying act out your aggression. I'm saying feel the aggression, but don't necessarily hook up your vocal cords or your musculature. Just feel the heat of that. So this, by feeling the heat of it and not making it into that, blame or revenge or any of the other things that we can come up with, by not doing anything with it, it gives that intensity chance to actually be what it is, not separate. You're not separate from that. We tend to separate ourselves by ignoring. So then when something comes along that triggers that, then all this aggression comes out. So you completely miss the extreme suffering that those people are going through that are doing that. By going into war, like they're wrong, they shouldn't be doing that. And those, whatever you said they were. I can't say that because there's a child in there.
Some of it isn't even what they're doing. It's like
Yes.
driving in Detroit on the freeways is like driving with angry bees, and you're not of the hive. It's just it's a shock, but it's fast, it feels good.
That's a key to feel like, you feel like.
Yeah, it's like,
So it's awareness, and saying that you're not living with your awareness is still awareness. You can't get rid of it. And so, but the powerful thing about it is if you stop trying to be somebody else and you're actually willing to be the negative person that you've been trying to avoid or get rid of, if you actually can do that, without taking somebody out, running into somebody, but if you can actually do that, then some kind of a transition begins to happen where you begin to see more clearly, especially if you're doing a lot of sitting practice, you begin to see more clearly what's behind people's aggression. The people who are driving that way begin to sense or see that it's because they're suffering so much. And they want to fight, they want war, we have crazy people, as we know, I don't need to mention any names. Just totally insane people are running things. And there's a few people who are trying to help people. Fundamentally help them. So I would just say, stay out of Detroit. Go to Kalamazoo. That's not too bad, is it? Weren't you yelling at somebody in Kalamazoo? You're in Kalamazoo, you're upset with somebody, I can't remember. I remember looking at them and said, they're suffering. You were yelling at them. I was probably yelling at them too. So it's not about being some kind of saint and not expressing yourself or being upset. But as long as you can see that, you can see the dynamic, you can see the way you've been triggered, and you get mad and you get irritated. And the idea of get to know what that is. Be genuine. And I'm not easy to misunderstand. I don't mean act out your anger, act out your feelings. I'm saying be with whatever's arising. And so that may involve some vocal cords hooked up, or may involve, but probably not as much as it would happen if you're trying to suppress that, because then it comes out like a volcano, and then you're not even able to even witness it or see it. As other people see the volcano, but you're kind of shutting down all that because you feel so justified. So that just finally, you have a question, Andrew? I just wanted to say finally was that bad neighborhood is just a metaphor to say stay back away from the literal bad neighborhood, and then also the different aspects of your mind that if you know that if you go in there, it's like a vortex, you get drawn down into that. So don't fight with it, because that makes it stronger, because you give it a kind of reality it doesn't even have, and don't explain it, because that gives it, there's some kind of essays being written about this in your mind, descriptions of it. Don't describe it. And don't turn away, push it away, or distract yourself into whatever it may be, the computer or the phone or the internet or bowling or something else. So, but to try to bring as much awareness into any of that stuff as you can. And you can do that more, what do you call it, more better? You can do that if you try, if you sit down, hold still, and watch what moves. And what's going to be moving is aspects of your mind that are totally invisible when your body's moving. If your body is moving this much, the awareness part, and you'll see this, the awareness part of your mind actually just loses its intensity. It's just like a rheostat on those light bulbs where you can dim them down. As soon as you start to move, it's like the awareness starts to slow down. But if you're holding very, very still, even for 10 minutes or 10 seconds or 20 minutes, then anything that moves in there is very, very vivid. It's like a shadow on a white wall. It's not that funny.
Evidently it is.
Just saying that was funny. Okay. So, any questions especially from anybody who hasn't ask. Jax, do you have any questions? No? Anyone else hasn't asked a question? Cody? Inada? Inada, do you have a question? No? Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah, certainly.
Isn't a neighborhood first unknown and then we treat that according to prejudice and stories that we hear. So how can we balance them and is a neighborhood and also keep examining and then conclude that's a bad neighborhood?
Yeah. Practice as much as you can. Get as much time as you can in front of the wall on the cushion, holding still and watching the way your personal combination of causes and conditions that arise as time, and see the way that so that your ability to see deeply into anything that's happening with you, whether it's apparent outside or apparent inside, is clear. So you're strengthening the awareness. It's a way of getting a stronger, more vivid, more open, more larger sky in your mind. And the clouds are still there. The clouds of confusion are there, but there's a lot of room around them. So it's just a metaphor that I like. Your mind is like the sky, and it's unbound, unceasing. The sky doesn't come from somewhere. You don't come from somewhere. Your fundamental nature is spiritual. You're just having, as they say, sometimes a physical experience. So it's about being aware that you're of the bad neighborhood. It's about not necessarily, you might find yourself in the middle of a bad neighborhood to start with before you can begin to back out of that or see how that happened. And you won't be able to see it happen if we keep trying to control it or stop it from happening or go to war with it. Just any kind of war, just any kind of resistance doesn't work. That's why these bumper stickers that say resist on it, I think, that's not so good. We're not saying you shouldn't look at it, but resisting it, it's too easy. It's such a magnet to pull. The initial intent is good, but then it will pull you into warfare. You have to be really careful not to go to war with people who are suffering, no matter how mean they are. I have to see that. It's a spiritual path. More. Further comments? Yes.
What is uninvestigated negativity and how do you look at it?
So uninvestigated negativity would be something that, say, just as an example, there are other ways we could go with it, but say something that really negative happened to you when you were 3 or 4, and because it was so negative, you shut it out. You found a way to just forgot about it. You're not going to think about that anymore. And you might start to flash on it when you become an adult. You might think, that was really, I don't know what happened there, but I've completely forgotten that whole area. And so, and I'm not saying deliberately go into that. I would say start where you are. Start your sitting, and eventually, if you sit enough and stretch your awareness enough and train your mind to see more clearly anything that's arising, eventually that area will be seen on some level. Maybe not as a memory. You might never actually have the content of that, but that area that is twisted up, or where there's still some suffering locked in, or some fear, or something will start to show up, and it'll start to show up. It could show up in your everyday situation. So quite often, it'll show up along the lines of what I think you're asking about. It'll show up in a totally ordinary situation where suddenly you have intense fear for no reason, or you have intense anger, but no, you can't find anything about it. You can't. It's almost like it kind of invalidates you. So we try to look and see if it gets really intense. You might go to a therapist, and then that he, she, or they might take you down and try to track that down, which is quite often what, to try to find out what that is. There's all kinds of therapies, 75 or 80 of them out there that try to deal with removing past problems. I'm not saying that's wrong. You might have to do that. Might need a therapist, might need a psychiatrist, might need any number of things. But as a meditation teacher, I would say, train your mind to sit down, hold still, and watch what's moving, so that when something like that does come up, what it runs into is not a mind that's clogged with, trying to manipulate things based on right and wrong, good and bad, and hope and fear, but a mind that is more like a blue sky. So any cloud is welcome, and the sky doesn't care one bit what kind of cloud comes along. And the other metaphor to take that a little further is that no matter how terrible the tsunami is, it leaves no mark on the sky. Unless it's a jet trail. And they only last about 4 hours. Yeah, not funny. Yes, sir.
Why doesn't intellectual knowledge that maybe as we're diving into these things, that these emotions are going to come up or are coming up, why doesn't that sort of ease the experience of it, or sort of
conceptual ideas?
Yeah, like knowledge that, like, say, going into this topic is going to bring up fear, but then once I'm through the fear,
What's the question?
It'll disappear. Why doesn't knowing that the emotions are coming up, like, take the edge off or help make it any easier?
Yes, because it's a relative. No, it's relative. It's based on knowing and not knowing. And this particular path is based on those not being two different things. Knowing and there's no knower, and there's nothing to be known. This is called the fancy word is shunyata, emptiness. And emptiness is completely full. It's completely flooded with everything. But it's empty of our ideas about it. So therefore, when we solve that, that's why even though I'm always talking about awareness, we also spend a great deal of time studying traditional texts that point to this kind of practice. All this Lankavatara Sutra, Samdhi Nirvachana Sutra, and so on. All the texts that support the thinking process in such a way so that you, as you practice, when the ego mind, the self-centered mind, starts to question this, sitting here doing nothing kind of thing, there's a whole panoply of ideas, the three poisons, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 links on the chain of existence, all kinds of structures, and those are just a few of them, about how the mind is working and how the mind grasps at something and why this creates suffering. And so we do both. It's a traditional metaphor for that is the two wings of the bird. Over here is the meditation or the intuition, and over here is the thinking process or concepts and logic. But this is not logical. It's logical right up to the edge of the cliff where you have to jump. And if you think you're real, you're not going to want to jump. But if you jump, then you do jump and you do fall, as it's been said, but you just don't hit bottom. Why? There isn't anybody.
Shane from Texas
Shane
asks, how come not knowing is sometimes okay and other times it's excruciating?
Well, there again, it's just being caught up in the relative truth, which is sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. It's just being tossed around by things. So unless there's a specific question about it, at some point those aren't two separate things. It's difficult because if I speak about the concept of that then pain and pleasure are not two different things. They're two aspects of the same thing. But that's really, it's hard to make that work as a thought or as an idea about it, because it tends to transcend the very words that are being said. That's why in Buddhism, especially in Zen, they're full of all kinds of gimmicks, koans, and tricks, the sound of one hand clapping and the mouse in the cupboard. You all know that one.
A mouse.
Yeah, you think it's a mouse, and it's actually 1,500 mice. That's our personal story, which all need to be live trapped because we don't kill mice. Final question? Yes, sir.
You mentioned before that something like this can be an indicator of a bad neighborhood. Can I don't got this?
It seems like the positive part has a little bit more, to address your question as clearly as I can, has a little bit more confusion about it, because it's a little bit more of a prideful kind of thing. So it's buying into the self-consciousness, not to get too exotic here, but it's buying into an aspect of consciousness that's kind of a puffed up. Whereas the other one is like saying, I don't have this, I don't get this, I don't know this. The not knowing part is also is more true or not true than the positive part. It's just that the not knowing area has a lot more ventilation in it. So not knowing, there's more of a possibility because it's not filled up with the pride. So it's more about saying, I don't understand this. So there's more of an openness. So via negativa is a way, by the negative way. This is why in the ancient Indian philosophy it's not this, neti, not this, not this, not this, not this. You can't find it anywhere because it's not separate. So it's just another way of those who have realized what this is, have different ways of teaching it. And usually the negative situation is the one that has to be looked at. Not that it's fundamentally negative, it's fundamentally neither one, but looking at the positive one is too much pudding. Whereas the negative one is, who ate the pudding? Aren't those great metaphors? Food metaphors. Sorry about that, Andrew. One last question, if there is one. Okay, thank you very much.